We are deep into the offseason when subject matter, news, notes, rumors are a little bit harder to come by. The Seahawks begin full squad OTAs this week, but reporters can't watch any workouts until tomorrow, so information there is sparse. But this is not the case today. Not on this show, not now. I am joined by a very special guest today, best-selling author, longtime college football reporter, and preeminent college football sideline reporter Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports and The Athletic joins me today. We're going to get into a wide range of topics, including a piece he did recently on The Athletic, taking a deep dive with coaches' input on the 2025 quarterback class. We're going to talk about his now famous Freaks list going on 20 years and how that has grown to what it is today. And I'll also get his thoughts on a wide range of topics, ranging from some things going on with the Seahawks, as well as the UW Huskies and the WSU Cougars. Stick around till the end when he shares some thoughts on the late, great Mike Leach, who Bruce had a very special connection and relationship with. Fox Sports' Bruce Feldman joins me today on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Smash that like button, as they say. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the bell so you always get notifications of future episodes. You can subscribe on any audio podcast platform that you prefer, but if you want to hear episodes without ads, you can do that on Spotify for a very low monthly fee. You can also support the show with a super thanks or by buying me a coffee. All of those links will be in the description. You can also just leave a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. I don't want to waste any time today. Bruce Feldman was kind enough to take some time today from his home in Los Angeles to join me on the show. Let's get into it. Here's Bruce. Joining me from Los Angeles this morning, it is my honor to welcome Bruce Feldman to the show. Bruce, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Now, the thing that I didn't know until we started chatting a few moments ago is that you actually have some history in this city, in Seattle.
I did. I was working for ESPN, and at the time, this was in the early days of ESPN.com. I don't even know if we were called ESPN.com at that moment. We had a partner company that was owned by Paul Allen. And so I worked in Factoria or Bellevue and I lived in Queen Anne and, loved it. Was the Seahawks were the Sonics were rolling then.
Yeah.
I mean, and so it was a really interesting experience. It was beautiful, part of the country. And so, now I go back for UW games. But was able to go to the game where, and I covered Pete Carroll at USC, so I definitely had a lot of good relationship with him. And when they won to go to the Super Bowl, it was kind of awesome because I had always heard that's the loudest building in football, and it was pretty remarkable. My buddy Brock Heward, who I later worked with as on the same announce team, he was doing local radio there. And I remember I went down to see him, and I don't know if it was in like the radio, maybe it had a box or was it, but it was outside. And it was just, I come getting goosebumps thinking about it. Like I love that stadium. And I think it was, it was really cool. Like that, it's a really neat sports city because, I think of as a sideline reporter, I'd be down on the field, but when the UW team would walk out on the field before anybody's there and they'd play the George Clinton Atomic Dog song. And there's just a lot of, it's this gorgeous stadium that's on the water, it's spectacular. And I guess it would be easy to get just used to it, but it's for people who are not from there. You're like, man, this is pretty amazing, of all of it. So before we came on, I was pointing out your logo. I was like, man, I would run up Cary Park to, and look out and see that view. You can't beat it. So
yeah, it's an iconic view for a reason. Let me ask you this then, because you were so familiar with Pete Carroll and his time at USC, when he was hired here in 2010, there was a lot of pushback. In fact, I'm blanking on the reporter's name now, but there was a a now infamous piece written on ESPN about how it just wasn't going to work. In fact, it wasn't even going to work for more than a couple of years because that rah style that he was known for just wasn't going to translate to the NFL. Did you think it would work when he got the job here?
Yeah, I mean, when Pete had it going at USC, he was such a force of nature. If you think about it, like that place was so dysfunctional. Like Pete was like their 5th choice when they hired him, and I don't know if anybody thought it was going to work there, right? And then it was a perfect hire at the perfect time for USC. And like it's not surprising because he gets guys to want to play for him. He's so charismatic. I just was so blown away by it. You'd see how he'd bring people together, and just his force of energy. It was really cool to see what he did for Seattle, did for that franchise. And I don't know, when he left there, it was more like, ooh, that sucks the energy out of USC, how they replaced that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just he was such an like that was the program. Say whatever you want about Alabama and what Nick Saban's done since then, but when that decade Pete Carroll had, I mean, he took a program. Again, there's a lot of dysfunction around USC, and people, Jen Cohen's trying to clean that up now,
Yeah.
but he overcame all of that. And I think that was just, that's a credit to him and the staff he put together and the buy-in he's able to get from people.
How'd you feel about the timing of it when the Seahawks made the change this offseason?
Surprising, just because again, I'm not close to it anymore. I saw Pete maybe 2 years ago at the combine and caught up with him, but I watch them, but it's not like I'm around them. So I didn't know what the inner workings of things going on there are. It's a big change. Like I actually, I covered Mike when he was the DC at Michigan. Really like him. I think he's super smart. And so it's not surprising that he got a head coaching job. It's just that, it's like you follow, he's following. He's got big shoes to fill, right? But I think he's smart. He's smart enough to know that I'm going to be me, and he's been around a lot of good coaches too. And I think he's made some really, like, I like some of the guys he's put on his staff. So I'm interested to see how that goes. But Pete was such a presence and everything, and it just it'll surprise me that he's not on the sidelines. It's just got so used to it.
Yeah. One of the things that always is discussed whenever a team, unless you have a franchise quarterback in place, and if you have a franchise quarterback in place, often there aren't coaching changes during that time. But there has been conversation here around the quarterback position ever since Russell Wilson was traded. And Geno Smith's a polarizing player. There's some questions about his future here long term, with his contract kind of ballooning in 2025, which is why there has been and will continue to be so much attention placed on the quarterback position among the fan base and the media here. As we look ahead to 2025, one of the reasons there was a lot of support here for the Seahawks potentially making a move to maybe take a quarterback this year, and we'll never know what would have happened if Michael Penix had lasted till 16. I think there would have been a lot of intrigue around that pick, certainly. But the 2025 class has taken its hits. There are people who say it's just flat out good. I've had a draft analyst on the show 3 weeks ago who just said it was flat out bad. But you did a piece in The Athletic and the New York Times last week, really taking a deep dive into that class and talking to coaches. And it might not be as bad as people think, right? Because guess what? Guys play more, they get better, they take steps. Nobody would have thought Jaden Daniels was a first-round pick this time a year ago. And then you point out in your article, the same thing kind of happened with Joe Burrow. Who were some guys, as you were doing the research for this piece and putting it together, that you think are poised to make that jump that 10 months from now we'll be talking about as potential first-rounders?
Yeah, I would say start out with this. This is not to sidestep the question, but just for a second. From the coaches I talked to, Carson Beck from Georgia is a guy that people do really like. He's super smart. He has a quick release. He's got good size. He's probably more athletic than people initially thought he was. He really operates that system, and I think there's a lot to like there and see him as a legit first-round quarterback. Once you get though into this, as you said. So I started looking back. You can go back a long ways, but certainly even in the last 5 drafts, the last 4 years of those 5, somebody has shot up into the top 5. Joe Burrow, nobody's looking at Joe Burrow as a, first or second day pick, or even, he's probably a late quarterback until he just exploded and
Yeah.
put up arguably the best season any college quarterback's ever had. So you had Joe Burrow. Then Zach Wilson, goes to the number 2 to the Jets. And obviously that's not working out, but nobody saw him, going that early, a year before. In this draft, you have Jaden Daniels. Last year, you had Anthony Richardson, who
Mhm.
went top 5. There's a handful of guys. So when I talk to some of these coaches, it's like, who has the chance maybe to clean some stuff up and could make a big move? I mean, there's a handful of guys. Jackson Dart, who's Lane Kiffin's quarterback at Ole Miss. He's very streaky, but he has a really good arm. He's a really tough kid, and he's athletic. And they expect to have a big year. He's one I would keep an eye on. I would also keep an eye on Connor Wegman, the quarterback at Texas A&M. Now this is his 3rd year. It's his 3rd system to be in. He hasn't played that much. He only played 4 games last year before he got hurt. He is really talented. Really, I mean, he's got good size, a terrific arm. He's tough, and he's athletic, and he has a really good pocket presence, according to, one of the coaches who's faced him and kind of compared him to other guys he's seen. He goes, I actually think he's got more talent than some guys who were high picks in this draft. Garrett Nussmeier, again, we talked about 2 LSU guys. He might be the 3rd one to jump in there. He's a name I think people in the Pacific Northwest will remember. His dad, Doug,
Mhm.
played at Idaho, played in the NFL, and is now a longtime NFL quarterback coach. His son isn't as tall. He's 6'1", but he's kind of a gunslinger. He's got a really good arm. He's really bright. When Jaden Daniels didn't play in the bowl game, he played in the bowl game for LSU against Wisconsin and ended up leading them to a big comeback win. He also looked pretty good in the SEC title game 2 years ago against Georgia when he jumped in when they were getting blown out. He doesn't have the 2 first-round receivers. I don't think his receivers will be anywhere near as good as what Jaden Daniels had, but his offensive line will be very good, and he's talented, so he's one to keep an eye on. And then kind of a wild card, you have Jalen Milroe. Had a really good season last year.
Mhm.
He's an explosive athlete. I mean, he's got the strength of basically Jalen Hurts with more speed. He's got a pretty strong arm, and now he's going to get and play in the same offense that, Seattle fans will recognize, because Michael Penix lit up the country last year with those 3
Yeah.
great receivers. I don't think Alabama has the receivers that, that Penix had last year, but Kalen DeBoer knows what he's doing, and I know everybody likes Jalen Milroe there internally about just how hard he works and how committed he is. Now they just need to see him kind of work on getting the ball out of his hands faster. But he's one I would put on your radar too.
And then another guy listed at, near the top of your list in that piece is maybe the one that there's the most disagreement on, and that's Quinn Ewers out of Texas. And the reason that I always think that he has some intrigue here is 2 drafts ago, in one of the, I think it was the day 2 post-draft press conference, when John Schneider and at the time Pete Carroll would always come out and kind of rehash how the day went. He name dropped Quinn Ewers just kind of out of the blue a couple of times. Like, he was clearly familiar with him 2 draft cycles ago. He just seems kind of like a guy that would have some qualities that John Schneider would be drawn to. But there's a lot of disagreement on him. Some see him as a potential first rounder and some don't like him at all, right?
Yeah, I think some of this, it's an interesting study here, because he is the guy who was technically the highest rated quarterback ever to come out of like this era of online, the Rivals and Scout.com and now 247 and On3.
Right.
And so he came into college with a huge reputation. And also, on top of it, he didn't play his senior year of high school in Texas. He took, I think it was reported $1.4 million he was getting to go up to play football at Ohio State, as part of like memorabilia deals that he was getting. He never, he was not a I don't think he was close to pushing CJ Stroud for the job. CJ Stroud won that job going away, and he didn't play. And then he ended up transferring to Texas. Had some good moments and some rocky moments in his first year. Last year, I think he continued to get better. And look, he's got Sark, who's a great play caller. And as one of the coaches I talked to a couple of weeks ago for that story on The Athletic you're talking about, he said Ewers had superstars to work with, skill talent. Remember, his first year he had Bijan Robinson, who was the best running back in college football. And last year he had not just Xavier Worthy, but he had A.D. Mitchell, who's a freaky athlete too, and they had a really good tight end, and they had a good offensive line. That's not to say, look, you can say from a receiver standpoint, that's what Jaden Daniels had, but I think people like his arm. I think the stuff you start to hear though is like, oh, people try to compare him to Patrick Mahomes, and he was the great because he will throw from some good arm angles off platform. He's creative that way, but in the context of it, it's like, well, he's not the playmaker Patrick Mahomes is. He's not as athletic as Patrick Mahomes. That's unfair to criticize him for being compared to the greatest quarterback in football right now. I mean, that's a lot to hang on a kid. I'm interested to see how he does this year because they still have talent. It's just different guys. I think they're a legitimate top 5, top 10 team who should make a playoff run. And so I would not at all be surprised if Ewers is a first round pick. But I think for a lot of people who heard all the hype coming out of high school, I think that's the part where it's like, I think you may get some pushback from some of the coaches who are like, well, I didn't really I didn't think he was as good as Michael Penix, or I didn't think he's not Caleb, or that's a high bar. But again, that's the crowd he was put in, fair, unfair, right or wrong, a couple of years ago.
And then another guy mentioned prominently in that piece, of course, Shedeur Sanders. Going to be a lot of intrigue this year about see how he does it. Colorado, presumably with an improved offensive line, they've put a lot of resources into that. There's so much growing buzz around the off the field stuff though, and some of the things Sanders has said and how he's going to be involved in the process. Maybe it's too early to tell, but do you get a sense that that's going to impact at all how some teams view him?
I don't know. I mean, his dad obviously spent a long time in the NFL and has a lot of relationships there. I think to Shedeur's credit, they had a dreadful offensive line. And he showed a lot of toughness, and he tried to battle through it, made a lot of plays and showed some good pocket presence, and he was accurate. I think he was a lot better than a lot of coaches thought he was going to be, especially considering that program before Deion got there, they were 1-11, and like 10 of the 11 losses were huge blowout losses. Like they weren't even close. They made big strides last year. At one point, they won their first 3 games, they're in the top 20. I think he's a good player. I don't know when people look at him, and this came up with one of the coaches, especially, he was like, their offensive line was so bad. He's really hard to evaluate because there were some games where he was just getting pummeled. And it's like, all right, I give him credit for, his toughness. But we'll have a better evaluation on him this year because the offensive line should be serviceable at the very least. And if that's the case, let's see what he can do with it.
And then I got to give some love to, as a Wazoo grad, I liked what some of the coaches said about Cam Ward in the piece, including one former Pac-12 head coach, I believe, that you quoted, who said he thinks he has a shot to get into the first round himself.
Yeah, and I would not be surprised based on what I've heard now coming out of Miami, but from people who have talked about him. Cam Ward, to me, would be a guy who, like, if you told me right now, 50-50, do you think he becomes a first-round quarterback? I think he will. He's got pretty good size. He can extend plays. He's got like a leadership spark to him. And quite honestly, Miami hasn't had that at that position in a while. So I know that they're really excited about him. I think what they've done, upgraded the roster around him. He has pretty good receivers now. I mean, he's got a good slot receiver. They added a good transfer from Houston. It's not what Penix had last year, but it's way better than what Miami's been there. And I think he will have a much better offensive line than what he had at Wazoo, where he was kind of running for his life. And obviously, and this from being a Wazoo guy, like he has to cut down on the fumbles and the turnovers. I think having a better offensive line and probably not, it probably, I think the way Cristobal is going to want to play a little bit will probably manage that a little as well. So I would expect him to have a big, big year. And I would not at all be surprised if Miami's a playoff team with him leading them there.
It'll be fun to watch. His story's been interesting and kind of be an interesting litmus test of, he had originally declared for the draft last year and then pulled his name back out when he got an offer from Miami that he couldn't refuse. Just a fun guy to watch. I mean, as a Cougar fan, it's been a little bit of a roller coaster his 2 years in Pullman. There'd be some bonehead plays, but the arm talent's undeniable. One of the quicker releases I think I've ever seen. And I thought his final game as a Coug in that Apple Cup last year, which they almost won, he was outstanding against a really good defense. Bunch of dudes got drafted off that defense this year. So the arrow pointing up for Cam Ward. Another thing that you do around the draft every year is you do a draft confidential, where you get, again, some coaches and front office guys speaking about prospects. Seahawks made an interesting quarterback move this offseason to get Sam Howell from the Commanders, who we all knew were going to go a different direction with the number 2 pick in the draft this year. And Howell was a guy that when he came out last year in that sort of now infamous quarterback draft where Sam Pickett's been replaced, presumably, in Pittsburgh, and a number of the other guys that were prominent in that draft have all been traded. Desmond Ridder, Sam Howell being one of them. He was a guy that you had a lot of coaches speak on the record that very highly of coming out in the draft 2 years ago. His toughness, the arm talent, and saw him as a legitimate starter. What were your initial impressions when Seattle made that move for him this offseason, even though Geno Smith is here?
It's kind of interesting because I think he's a very good backup right now. He's actually played quite a bit, obviously, in Washington. He's got good pocket presence. That was something that his name came up in our draft confidential, 2 months ago, because people were like, I played Sam Howell and I played Drake May. And obviously Drake May was the guy who went high in the first round. But I think they were like, Sam Howell had, better pocket presence. Sam Howell, I think they were more scared of, quite honestly. Now Drake May probably throws it better and he's taller. And he's a good athlete too. But I think just in terms of like, there was some stuff they really liked about Sam Howell. And, I don't want to, it's weird because he's been compared a little bit to Baker Mayfield at times, because it's like they're similar size guys.
Yeah, there's a physical resemblance there.
There is some, yeah. Like I remember seeing Sam when he was at the Elite 11 as a high school kid, and that was my first reaction. Now their personalities don't seem to be anything alike, and having talked to both of them quite a bit, I don't, there's not that. But obviously Baker was a first pick of the draft guy, whereas, Sam was taken way, way later than that. But, Baker continued to grow and evolve and had a really good second act, or whatever, maybe fourth act. I don't know what we're calling it, but, last year, but it was good. And I could definitely see Sam, whether it's in 2024 or 2026, being somebody starting quarterback and playing pretty well. I mean, I don't see anything that he just needed to play a lot, and he played a lot. He got a lot of reps last year. Of the quarterbacks who are in that like kind of recast Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, where they're just kind of bounced around and they played some and they were, I don't know, at this point, I would have a little more optimism about Sam than I would on some of these other guys, where I feel like they've gone some places, they're inconsistent. Yeah, there's some physical talent stuff that they have that's impressive. I'm a little more optimistic, I guess, on Sam Howell than maybe some people would be.
The other thing that you have become known for is your freaks list. What was the first year? I was trying to pinpoint this morning. What was the first year that you produced that?
It's 20 years ago now.
Wow.
And I actually did a story for The Athletic last summer on my first freak player. And it's a guy named Turnanande. He was a linebacker in the MAC at Miami of Ohio. He's actually teammates of Sean McVay. And
oh, wow.
he the numbers on him, he was a 520-pound bench press guy, and he was running 4.4 and just incredibly explosive. But it was the weight room strength that I remember. Like it's now the Broncos strength coach, a guy named Dan Dalrymple. He was there at that school, and then he went with Sean Payton to the Saints at some point. And the stories he had of what he could do in the weight room, and I reconnected with Turner, like I said, last summer, and his personal story is really pretty remarkable too. He got drafted in the NFL, played briefly. He was on some rosters, but played for the Titans and then played up in the CFL. But he was the first guy, and then it obviously grew and grew, and
Yeah.
it's changed a lot over the years, and I felt like it changed the most probably 5 or 6 years ago, or once I was really doing a lot of work as a sideline reporter, because they'd be on the field before games, and the other people who are on around the sidelines before games are NFL scouts, and they would so many of them would come up to me and go, "Hey, love the Freaks List," and they would talk to me about it. And once I started using those relationships to gather more information, because it wasn't just like, oh, it was FBS schools. Now all of a sudden I'm getting into FCS and Division
Mhm.
two, and I think I'm had a Division 3 guy this past year who ended up getting drafted. It's a fun project to work on, and I kind of pick at it over the course of a year, but it really gets ramped up soon. Like I try to push it back till later in the summer when we run it. And one of the reasons why I like to do it that way, is actually now playing for the Seahawks. And one of my favorite freaks of the last few years was Tariq Woolen. And I was talking to Jeff Traylor, who is the head coach at UTSA, about this. And I was like, what's the deal with because I knew Frank Wilson was the previous coach, and he had a receiver who was 6'4" with long arms and crazy athletic. And he told me the numbers he was like, when's this thing running? And I told him, and I think if it was running like as soon as possible, I don't know if he would have been like, yeah, please don't put him out there, because they were afraid somebody would try to poach him off his roster.
Oh,
And obviously, Tariq, as crazy as the numbers were, he went to Indianapolis and did it, matched them, and
yeah.
then obviously had a spectacular rookie year.
The Seahawks, looking at your last two freaks lists, the Seahawks have only drafted one of them, Byron Murphy, who this year was, I think, 18th on your big freaks list. And then I think he was number 3 on your pre-draft of just the draft prospects. Doesn't always translate to NFL success. As you mentioned, the first guy ever. Mazi Smith was number 1 last year. I think by most accounts, Cowboys fans would say he was a disappointment as a rookie year. Didn't really translate immediately anyway to the field. As you go through the process every year, is there a common trait that you find among these guys in the way that they sort of approach their training that makes them as athletic as they are, or are some guys just born different?
I think some guys are just born different, to be honest. Like, good luck finding anybody else who's Tariq's length as a cornerback and can do, you may see somebody who has like one of those, traits or something,
Yeah.
but to have it like across the board, it's just crazy. I think back to, some of the guys who, we put out there. And this year's number 1 guy is still in college.
Yeah, true freshman last year. Is it Nicholas? Is that how it's pronounced? Nicholas Harbor?
Harbor. Yeah. I mean, he's 6'5", like 6'5", 235, 240, and he's one of the fastest football players in the country. I mean, you watch the 100-meter dash of him, and it looks like he's running against toddlers, because they're like head and shoulders shorter than him and smaller. You just don't see people like that, run like that and do those things. And so it's hard. I mean, it's kind of like, I hate to be cliche, but like that's why it's the freaks list, because there's just guys who are just so rare in what they do, and there's different reasons why guys end up on there. I remember, there might be an offensive or lineman or defensive lineman who's 300 pounds who can throw a football 80 yards. One of my favorite stories that I did at the Athletic, was on a D lineman from Hawaii who's like could throw the ball like 90 yards, but he also could, like, the bench press numbers on this guy were insane, and it was just, those are the stories that people love to talk about in bars about their teammate who is this guy or something, and just doesn't always mean they're going to be Bo Jackson as a football player or Randy Moss. I mean, some of those guys certainly, can have spectacular, um, careers, but then there's just other guys where they're just really gifted in a way, but maybe it doesn't always translate into football.
And then you had a little bit of an opportunity to see Mike Macdonald work at the college level the one year he was DC at Michigan. You mentioned that and wrote about that in a piece around that time about how he was part of a contingent along with Sharon Moore that kind of turned things around there and ultimately resulted in Michigan being able to win a national championship. And then Byron Murphy, who was one of your freaks last year, gets selected number 16 to Seattle. What were your initial thoughts on that match?
It'll definitely be interesting. I mean, like, look, he came from that Ravens system, obviously, Mike, and did a tremendous job for them at Michigan. Again, I keep going back to just how smart this guy is. Byron was super disruptive. I mean, for most of the year last year, and we covered a bunch of Big 12 as well at Fox. Devondre Sweat was the guy getting most of the attention media wise because he's 6'5", 365 pounds. And for being those measurables, it's not like he's, a sloppy 365 pounds. He was just a massive man, and he's a good player, but it was the other guy, Murphy, who was, smaller at 300 pounds, who was the one that gave everybody else more problems because he was so disruptive and so twitchy. And I think that aspect is going to translate really well for what, putting him in the middle of the Seahawks defense and let him go be disruptive.
While I've got you, there's a couple other local storylines here that I think Seahawk fans would be interested in, even if they're not specifically Seahawk related. I have to ask you about your reaction to Michael Penix going 8 to Atlanta.
Mixed. And I say mixed because I spent a bunch of time around Michael over the last, even back when he was at IU. I genuinely like him, have a lot of respect for him. Almost last year at this time, it was like last April, I went up and spent a bunch of time with him, and he really opened up to me in a way about the struggles he'd overcome. And he was very candid about it. And I was blown away by the way he played the last 2 years, especially last year. He got my Heisman vote, I would say. Jay Daniels had a great year. I voted Michael Penix Jr. number 1 on my ballot. And I didn't really, I was not like, oh, this is that close, So when I say mixed, like, I was surprised that draft Twitter was like, oh, he's not a first round pick. And I'm like, he's not 5'7", and yes, he's had season ending injuries, but he's been healthy the last couple of years. I get that. I don't care that he's like a year older than most, he's younger than Bo Nix probably by a month or something. Like, it's not like quarterbacks play if they're really good for a long time, so I'm not worried about that. So I was happy for him that he went in the top 10. I think he merits a top 10 pick. It's just the Falcons fit with the deal they just did with Kirk Cousins is a head scratcher to me. I'm interested to see how it plays out, but I got a lot of respect for Michael Penix Jr. I mean, he's somebody that, I hope he gets a chance to play, and I expect him, when he does, he will do really well.
And then I want to ask you about someone in particular to finish up with, but in respect of being balanced, I guess, equal time, right? For my Seahawk viewers that I know are UW fans, the fit of Jedd Fisch going to UW.
Jed did an amazing job at Arizona. I don't think people realize how abysmal that situation was, and he had a lot of guys who I think did their best coaching jobs when they worked for Jedd Fisch. Obviously we talked about Pete Carroll. Brennan Carroll turned out to be a really good O-line guy. He was a really good evaluator, and they upgraded their big. Johnny Nansen was his defense coordinator. Johnny Nansen did the best work of his career for Jedd Fisch. And I think everybody who's known Jed knows he's very smart. And I thought that made a lot of sense, and that was a tough job, but he took over a program that lost like 20 games in a row. And in 3 years, they were a 10-win team. And I would argue he is, in the last 3 years, he did as good as, as great as what Kalen DeBoer did, taking over for 4-8 and then getting them to the national title game. Like, there were at least players at Washington. Like, Coach Pete left, like, his last recruiting class was excellent. And I'm not even talking about, like, Puka didn't, obviously transferred out, and Latu got medicaled and couldn't play, and McDuffie left early, but, like, there were really good players there.
Yeah.
There was hardly anything at Arizona. So, I think Jed's got a pretty big rebuild on his hands because almost everybody left, but I think he's one of the best coaches in college football because he's really smart and he knows what he's doing. But I think this one's going to take some time because now they're going in a tougher situation in the Big Ten, and they have, to really overhaul and upgrade and rebuild the trenches, especially. And we'll see what he has, quarterback wise. Obviously I know Will Rogers played a lot in the SEC. He's definitely not a Michael Penix arm or even close to it. And then, there's a freshman I saw at the Elite 11 who's dynamic and, could be a really fun player for them. But, there's just a lot of rebuild that has to go on in that program right now.
One thing that strikes me about him and his approach and his demeanor is, in an age when we see college coaches getting out of the college game, even a guy like Chip Kelly willing to take a coordinator position at another school because he doesn't want to deal with all the stuff that head coaches have to deal with now in college football, that Fish seems to be leaning into all that and almost using it as a recruiting approach. Like, come here, we're going to prepare you to be professionals, and we're going to use the transfer portal to our advantage, and we're going to take advantage of all the resources that we have. And he doesn't shy away from any of that. He strikes me in the way that he just commands a room as a guy. He feels like an NFL coach to me. Do you see him making that jump someday?
He absolutely could, because, he's bounced between those two worlds probably as seamlessly as any coach I can think of. Some guys may go there and then stay or whatever, but like, he's ping pong back. He had time with the Ravens. Then he went to University of Miami. He was at Minnesota. Then he was, when he was at UCLA and Michigan, but then he was at, working for Sean McVay and with the Rams, and then he's working for Bill Belichick. And so, I could see him in either world, at any juncture, depending on what he feels. But I also think he has a very good sense for what, college athletes, I think, need and want. And I think he knows how to serve that. Right. And we saw that at Arizona. And I just think he's been one step ahead or two steps ahead of people on a lot of things around building a program and being a CEO, but also running an offense that, scheming stuff up. And I think he's just really good at that.
And then I can't let you go, Bruce, without asking you about the Pirate, of course. Swing Your Sword. I was shocked to kind of catch up on this and see that it's been, I think, 15 years now since you wrote that book, and maybe 17 years now. And, we lost Mike Leach about a year and a half ago. Legendary coach, known well around here for his time at Washington State, but obviously built his legend at Texas Tech before moving on to Mississippi State after his time in Pullman. What are some of you got to know him really well over the course of those years. What are some of your enduring memories of him as you think about him now?
Man, it's just a lot, because it depends on what mood you get me in or whatever. Like, what's crazy now is, so I've thought of this a bunch of times, but especially like recently, like, so I coach my kids' football teams, and one of the kids I coach is a son of a football coach who I know through Leach, and that guy spent 15 years working for Leach. Dennis Simmons, Washington State fans will remember Dennis. He's a really good receivers coach. So I coached his son pretty much since they moved out to California, so probably 5 seasons. And, we run Mike's stuff. I didn't initially, but then all of a sudden we started doing all sorts of air raid stuff. And I was like, you know what, this makes sense and it's good, whatever. And But there's been so many times where I'm like, man, I would love to call Mike and tell him about this, or, and I selfishly, because I know, like I was close to his family, and I feel for Sharon, his wife, because she was the rock that Mike leaned on for everything. Um, but selfishly, I miss not having the chance to tell my buddy some of this crazy stuff, because he would eat that stuff up. And I still can't believe he said it's, whatever it is, 16 months or 17 months. I still can't believe that he's not here. Because he was the guy you could get a hold of at any time, as long as it was 2 in the morning, or whatever it was, because he's never seemed to sleep at night. And so I have a lot of memories. I mean, I remember visiting him in Pullman. We did a bunch of his games. Unfortunately for him, we did a bunch of Apple Cup games, and those never went well. And yeah, you could ask him anything. Just he's such a unique figure, and it's like when he passed, I don't doubt that a lot of people, had unique, like they ran into him in an airport or at a bar or something, or at a coffee shop, and they probably had a very personalized experience, because that was Mike. He was genuinely curious about everything, especially people. And so, I mean, I could talk to you about him for an hour and still leave out a lot of stuff. It's just, um, I genuinely miss him, and there will never be anybody else like him. You
Yeah.
know, um, there was stuff that would frustrate you about him, like, and that's nobody's perfect, but he was he was so curious about things, and like, I have a picture in my phone still of it was a night in Washington State fans will definitely probably remember the situation. So there was chaos at Tennessee on their coaching search.
Mm-hmm.
The AD flew out here because I think Mike was on the road recruiting in LA, and he met with Mike, and it was the Tennessee job. And like 4 days later, I remember there was the Football Foundation event where the Hall of Fame was they had at the time their gatherings in New York. And I remember running into Mike at like 2 a.m. in a bar, and it was like an overserved night for a lot of folks, including both of us. And I remember I wanted to text a buddy of mine who knew Mike, and it was a coach buddy, and I was like, "Hey, let me take a picture of you. So I'm gonna send it to so and so on the West Coast." And it's this wild look in Mike's face. The hair is more messed up than mine right now, but he has this like look of like confusion and joy all at the same time. And it's just like still have the picture. It still kind of makes me smile when I see it. It wasn't like it was just an impromptu thing, but it was like the look on Mike's face, and he was, I don't know, he's just such a one of a kind guy, one of a kind personality.
Well, and his legacy lives on in both all the video we have of his press conferences over the years. Some
His weather report in Lubbock and all the
very entertaining. The mascot stuff is fantastic. But also every Sunday or Monday or Thursday or Saturday, if you turn an NFL game on now, who knew that, the offense that critics used to say would never work in the NFL, that every single team now is running versions of the air raid, running 4 verticals, and we see Mike Leach everywhere we look.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And obviously I know he had, like Andy Reid had BYU roots, and he and Hal Mummy took a lot of stuff from what the Cougars were doing when they were really rolling in the 80s, and either pared it down and tweaked some of it. And obviously, took off in Texas high school football, and his fingerprints are all over the game, and his personality especially too. So, yeah, it's funny. I haven't, I didn't, when you said 15, 17 years, I didn't realize it was that long. It feels like it's like 10 years, but not almost 20.
So I imagine this is one of the slower months of the year for you after the draft and before college football ramps up. When do you really start kind of looking ahead to the 2024 season?
I mean, already now, like just last night, the Pac-12 meeting, Pac-12, Freudian slip, the Big Ten meetings were here in Southern California, are going on. And so I was out there was an event last night and saw a lot of the coaches, saw Jed Fish, saw, everybody in the league was out there. So it's just, that's already going on now, and because the transfer portal is so active, like Jonathan Smith, who obviously, Washington fans will remember. I spent some time with him last night and we were talking about portal stuff, and, it's an ongoing thing at this point.
One more question. What do you think? Do you have a gut feeling at this point, or even a feeling based on intel of ultimately where the Pac-2 are going to end up? Do you think they have a shot to rebuild that in some way? Or do you think when the next wave of realignment, they'll probably find a conference home?
My guess is the latter. I don't think they're going to be able to rebuild the Pac-10 or the Pac-12 or whatever it's going to be. I feel for both those fan bases, having had a lot of conversations with Wazoo coaches and folks, I think it's devastating. I think, Dickert did a really good job there of, because as you probably know, like that, from Mike, then Rolovich, that program and those players endured a lot of hardship and then this other thing last year was a gut punch to them, so I feel for them, and I don't know if there's going to be there's no easy answers for them.
Yeah. Bruce, I really appreciate you taking your time. I know you have a lot on your plate. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks.
Loaded some new bumper music for the outro last night, and didn't label it with any kind of descriptive terms because I wanted to be surprised. So we'll be mixing that up over the coming weeks. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the show. I am Dan Viens. You can follow me on Twitter, always at Seahawks Forever. Forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.